This is Anything for You. Sweet Haven Farm, Sweet Small Town Romance, Book 4. Written by Jessie Gussman. Performed by J. Dice. Episode 10. Chapter 19. Jillian woke up with a smile on her face. Last night had been the most amazing night of her life. McCoy didn't seem like the romantic type. He wasn't the romantic type, but he'd made a huge effort to do something nice for her, and he'd seemed to enjoy it just as much as she had. And kissing him, wow. She put a finger to her lips, like they might be different this morning than they'd been before. They felt different. Better. It was Thursday, and she had to go a whole day until she'd see him tomorrow afternoon, if she saw him then. She wanted to call him or text, wanted to spend every waking second with him. But she had a business to run and an elephant to tend to. Then she needed to check on Uncle Roy. Her happy bubble dipped slightly, and she threw her legs out of bed. Her heart was still full from last night, and she wouldn't soon forget the image of McCoy's deep blue eyes, hot and heavy-lidded as his face lowered toward hers. Her phone buzzed. She leaped toward it, thinking maybe it was McCoy calling, but it was an international number. She steeled herself and swiped. Bueno.
Jillian, this is Ricardo. I'm not sure if you remember me.
She remembered him. He'd worked in the circus. He'd been in several acts, everyone was, but he'd also been in charge of procuring the feed for the animals and buying and replacing exotics. He was some relation to the owners. She'd tried to stay away from him as much as possible, because her mother said that he was probably involved with the cartels that ran everything down there. They assumed he would not be so deeply involved with the administrative side of the circus and not be involved with the cartels. Basically, her mother hadn't trusted him, so neither had she. But he was nice, and she liked him. I do, she said. He didn't need to know everything she remembered or thought.
I've been hearing that you did not get my letter that should have arrived with Heidi.
No. So he was the one who had sent her the elephant.
My carriers just arrived back yesterday. They told me there were a lot of people at your place when they dropped her off. They were afraid of the police. We cannot bribe them.
She smiled, thinking of McCoy, his honesty and integrity. Very appealing.
They laid low for a bit, but they said you seemed to have everything under control.
She didn't bother to stop her eye roll. It's an elephant. I can't afford to keep an elephant.
Didn't they give you the money?
What money?
It was hard enough to send one elephant. We put her into an auto car on the train and faked the papers. Thankfully, there aren't any inspections, and there is a rail siding on a local line not 2 miles from your farm. The people who own that usually unload feed and fertilizer, but they let us borrow it for a night. My men were able to walk the elephant to your place from there.
He stopped to take a breath.
I had to sell Hazel to pay for Heidi, but I sent the rest of the money along because I know it's expensive to feed them.
I didn't see any money, but it doesn't matter. Hazel isn't doing well.
Oh?
He sounded surprised. The man in Brazil who bought her said she's not eating.
I see.
He sounded as concerned as she felt. They're sisters and they've never been separated.
I know. I didn't realize it would be that bad.
There was some talking in the background.
I have to go. I will look into this further and call you back. By this weekend at the latest.
Jillian could remember Ricardo's compassion. He wasn't one of the men who didn't care about the animals, nor one who was always walking around with a stick, making sure everyone knew and respected his authority. She had confidence that he would truly look into the issue and honestly try to fix things. She thanked him, and they hung up. Thursday went by slowly. McCoy called her on the lunch break, and they talked until after his afternoon session started. They spoke again for several hours that night. She wouldn't have thought she could spend hours on the phone, but they didn't lack for things to talk about. Friday, he called when the morning session was over just to tell her that he couldn't come straight home because he had a business lunch he had to get through first. She supposed it shouldn't have surprised her when, 2 hours later, Todd's car came flying down the drive and pulled up to the barn where she'd just cleaned Heidi's large enclosure and was putting the elephant back in. She locked the gate and turned to face him. He got out of his car with a smirk. "Afternoon. Nice day." "Sure is," she said. "I'm here to do an unscheduled inspection. You don't need to stay if you have work to do." He pulled out a clipboard and slammed his car door shut. She had a class that was starting in less than an hour, but she shrugged. "I can hang around." Irritation flashed across his features, but he gave her a tight-lipped smile. "No more dog bites?" "No." "That's good. The powers that be don't like to see complaints coming from your property when you're trying to get a permit. Only," he tilted his head like the thought had just occurred to him, "you're not trying to get a permit, are you?" She held his gaze. "I have 30 days. "I asked if you were trying to get a permit." She didn't want to make an enemy of this man, but she didn't want to give him a reason to take Heidi. The exact way he'd said big game preserve came back to her clearly. She straightened. Not only was Heidi in danger, if Todd had any clue that she was less legal than her elephant, he'd have DHS on the farm before her next class started. She'd bet on it. "Yes, I'm trying." It wasn't a complete lie. She had tried. She just stopped before she even got started when she realized she needed to be a citizen. "Funny that I can't find your name in the system," he said, to himself as much as to her, which made her wonder if he'd tried to break into the system somehow and sabotage her permit application, since there wasn't anything he could legitimately fail her for in his inspection. "Is Jillian your real name?" "Yes." "And you've applied for a permit?" A car pulled down the drive, and he turned from her to check it out, almost like he was afraid. It hit her that he thought McCoy might be coming. She felt that thought was right on the money, because he turned and said, "I'm going to get started with the inspection. You're not allowed to follow me around." Pretty sure he made that last part up. She was also sure that he wanted to get it over with before McCoy was there to watch him. He must not know McCoy had a meeting. "Too bad your boyfriend didn't get the promotion," he said as he started toward the gate. She stood where she was, beside the car, leaning on the shovel. When had McCoy found out about that? Maybe he didn't know. He hadn't said anything to her, and they'd talked for hours last night. Todd had his back to her, and she didn't bother talking to it. She'd see McCoy soon enough. Todd walked around the enclosure and out of sight. Wanting to follow, but not wanting to upset him, she couldn't figure out what he was doing that was taking so long. Finally, cars started arriving for her class and she walked to the kennel building. Gail Patton would be there with Bennett shortly after class. Dread and anxiety swirled in Jillian's stomach. Surely Todd wouldn't fail her and take Heidi today. she'd have a day at least to call Mario in Brazil. Trouble was, as soon as she did, she knew she'd have to agree to go down, and she didn't want to leave McCoy. She made it through her class, trying hard to concentrate, but was having trouble. Sometime during her class, Todd left. He didn't stop. She never even saw him. She didn't know what that meant, but hoped that she'd at least have until Monday before the government moved. McCoy hadn't come. He hadn't said whether he'd stop here on his way home or check on Uncle Roy first. The last student had barely left the drive when Gail's small car pulled in. Her son practically bounded out of the back seat, and he'd run around the car twice before Gail got out and stood. Jillian had to laugh. What a cute little boy. The school district was probably after Gail to medicate that one. He gave his hand easily to his mother, but jumped beside her as she strode to the kennels. Jillian put the last of the paperwork away, still smiling at the little boy. Unbidden, a thought came to her. What would McCoy's son look like? Blue eyes, blonde hair, that strong jaw, his height, the broad shoulders. She could see a miniature McCoy in her mind's eye, easily. A longing to be the mother of that little one, and maybe a sister to go along with him, pulled hard at her insides. She tried to shake it, but one glance at the little guy who was still jumping, now on one foot at a time, brought it back. Walking out of the kennel, she held her hand out to Gail. "I'm so glad you could come." "Thanks so much for having us. Bennett is excited, to say the least." She gave her hopping and skipping son a loving mother's glance. "Looks like it. I'm done here and we can walk over." They started over, Bennett skipping along, and Gail and Jillian talking about the nice weather. A white paper stuck to the metal rails caught Jillian's eye, and her voice trailed off in the middle of making a comment about the height of the corn and the last frost date. She hurried to the gate, staring at the paper, but not touching it. There were only 2 words on it, big and black: failed inspection. Although she'd suspected that's what he was going to do, it hit her in the chest and made her whole body feel heavy and wrong. "What's that?" Gail asked, coming up beside her. "I had an inspection with animal control today." She didn't bother explaining about the permit. "I've passed every one so far, but it looks like today I didn't." "That's odd. What's the problem?" "I don't know. The area has to be clean. There has to be feed and water. The fence has to be in place. Everything that I know about is in good order." She didn't want to pull Gail into her problems, so she shrugged. "Let's see if we can get Heidi to come over so Bennett can pet her. I'll do a few things with her, then we'll see if Bennett wants to ride. Will that work?" "Yes, yes, yes!" Bennett jumped up and down and fist-pumped the air. She slipped in the gate, not ripping the offending paper off by the barest of control, and walked slowly over to Heidi, petting her and giving her a carrot from her pocket. Giving the command, she stepped onto Heidi's trunk and rode it out of the gate. Bennett's eyes were as round as saucers, and Jillian had to laugh. One of the best parts of being a circus performer had been making people smile. Seeing Bennett's excitement and happiness breathed new life into her and helped her shove aside the issue of the failed inspection and the impending consequences. Heidi seemed to enjoy the attention as well. She performed beautifully, allowing Jillian to put her harness on and do her routine in its entirety. Jillian lost herself in the flow of the moves and the heat of the elephant, The feeling that she'd become one with the animal and they were working in tandem. It was a beautiful thing when everything went right and the one move flowed into the next. Heidi knew her part and played it to perfection, like there were 10,000 people watching rather than one wide-eyed little boy and his tired but happy mother. And a broad-shouldered man. Jillian realized with a start as Heidi and she wrapped up their act that McCoy leaned against the fence as well. She gave him a tentative smile, a little nervous after not seeing him for 2 days. His eyes were hot on her. They always were, but he'd had to have seen the sign, too. She did a backbend, flipping over into a sitting position before calling out, "Does Bennett want a ride?" He was saying yes before the question was out of her mouth. McCoy unlocked the gate. "You want him in there?" "Yes, please," she said, her voice softening on its own, which made him smile. Memories of their date and kiss flashed in her mind. He took Bennett's hand and led him through the opening. "Put your hand in front of her like this." Jillian put up the universal sign for stop. McCoy obeyed. "Hold him up." McCoy picked Bennett up under his arms. "Reach up," Jillian commanded. Bennett put his arms in the air and Jillian grabbed his hands, pulling him up and settling him on in front of her. "Now just walk beside her with your palm away from her. When you want her to stop, point your palm toward her." Jillian settled Bennett better in front of her. For the first time since he set foot on the farm, he was actually still. "Make sure she can see it," she added. McCoy gave her a raised brow. She shrugged. Of course it was common sense. He grinned at her, and warm feelings stirred in her soul at the private words that flowed between them without them saying a thing. McCoy did a perfect job of leading Heidi around, and Bennett seemed to enjoy his ride thoroughly. Gail was grateful and appreciative as she gathered her hopping and skipping son and walked to her car. Jillian slid over Heidi's head and commanded her to let her down. McCoy was there and she stepped into his arms. She hadn't seen him for days and was ready to bury her head in his chest and cry out her frustration with Todd and everything else that was going on with Heidi. She hadn't even thought about it, but Carlos would be calling again soon, asking about the money she owed him, which she'd spent on buying hay for Heidi. McCoy seemed to realize she was holding him tighter than usual. "What's the matter?" "I'm just happy you're home." "I forgot to say anything last night, but I didn't get the promotion." "Todd told me when he came today." She leaned back a little. "I'm sorry." "Maybe something else will work out," he said. He didn't seem angry, but she could see frustration on his face. She could understand that. Todd had failed her for no reason that she could see and had gotten a promotion. Didn't seem fair, but it also wasn't something she wanted to dwell on. So she nodded, but didn't comment. "I didn't stop and see Uncle Roy. Are you almost done here? Want to go home with me and I'll figure out something for supper?" Thrilled that he wanted to spend time with her, she remembered Bennett and stopped herself from hopping just like him in time. Instead, she grinned. "I'm finished and I'd love to." He put his arm around her and they walked to the truck. If she could keep her mind from the decisions that inevitably had to be made this weekend, she could maybe just relax and enjoy the company of the man she couldn't stop thinking about. After a supper of eggs with mushrooms and spinach and sausage, they played several rounds of cards. Jillian knew a few tricks from her years in the circus, but she didn't cheat, and McCoy beat them both every round. Uncle Roy took his dogs to his room. McCoy stood at the sink, scrubbing the old cast-iron skillet, the last dish that needed washed. "Would you like to sit on the swing for a bit?" he asked as she wiped the table. "Sure," she said, hoping his question was code for kissing. Her phone buzzed, an international number. She lifted a shoulder at McCoy's quizzical look and answered. "Bueno." "Jillian, this is Mario. I need you to make a decision about Heidi. Hazel hasn't eaten all week, and she's fading fast. I want to fly in tomorrow to get her, and I want you to come back down with me." Jillian swallowed. She looked at McCoy, who had finished scrubbing the skillet and had slowly turned. The narrowing of his eyes told her he'd figured out that this was the call they had dreaded. He wiped his hands on a tea towel, lifting his chin. He carefully hung the towel back up and walked out of the kitchen, through the door and onto the back porch, closing the door behind him. She thought that meant he was giving her privacy to make the decision herself, without feeling pressure from him. "She's lying down and hasn't gotten up all day." "I'll go," she said. "This will not be completely legal according to the United States government, so I can't tell you exactly when I'll arrive, but sometime before dark. I'll work out the logistics." That was fine with her. She didn't need to know details. She bit her lip. She didn't want to lose her elephants. She loved them, and Hazel knew her, so maybe having Heidi and her both come down would be the perk that she needed. Maybe she wouldn't need to stay down long. Trouble was, she still owed money from sneaking across the border the last time. Once she left, she might never return. Those days in the desert had almost killed her. She hung up with Mario just before someone knocked on the door. Jillian thought about getting McCoy, but he'd probably heard the car and would be coming in soon. She walked to the door and opened it. A tall blonde stood on the step with a bottle of wine, impossibly long legs and a short skirt that showed most of them. "I didn't know McCoy had hired a cleaning lady," the blonde sniffed, brushing by her. "Where is he?" Jillian closed the door, turning and leaning against it. McCoy came in the back door, his brows knitted together, until he saw the blonde. Jillian wasn't an expert on reading his facial expressions, but there was something that passed quickly over his features that said this woman was more than a stranger to him. If she had to make a guess, she'd say this was his ex-fiancée. He'd just talked to her not that long ago. And Jillian knew that whatever the woman had done to McCoy, he'd never really recovered from it. Maybe it was just as well that Jillian had just agreed to leave the country. But McCoy's eyes didn't rest on the tall blonde. He barely acknowledged her. His gaze skipped past her and speared Jillian. Like a magnet, they pulled her to him. She resisted at first. Whatever this woman wanted, she looked like a person that was used to getting her way, and Jillian didn't want to rock the boat. But she couldn't resist McCoy and his expression. She pushed off from the door and walked across the kitchen in front of the tall woman to his side. His arm came around her and something like relief eased his features. "Isabella, this is my girlfriend, Jillian." His voice rumbled against her side and she cherished the feeling of being tucked close. Although he probably suspected it, he didn't know for sure that she had committed to going to Brazil. There wasn't much time left for them. Isabella's face contorted. Her fingers flexed around the bottle she carried. Finally, she gave a regal lift to her chin. "I got the job. I wanted to thank you for your character reference. I brought this as a token of my appreciation." She held the bottle up before setting it on the table with a clank. One side of her mouth pulled back as she looked at McCoy and Jillian. "Looks like you don't need me." She swallowed, then her eyes settled on Jillian. "For what it's worth, he's a good man." Spinning on her heel, her dress riffling around her thighs, she strode to the door and walked out. The house was quiet after she left, like she'd taken all the life with it. Jillian didn't want to break the silence, but she felt that she owed McCoy. "Maybe you want her." She was going to talk about leaving, about going to Brazil, about how she owed the money and couldn't try to get back in the country, didn't want to die in the desert, but she couldn't bring all those words to her lips. Instead, she turned into McCoy and put her arms around him, tucking her head into his chest. "No." He put his arms around her, holding her close. "You're leaving?" he asked. "I told him I would. Hazel is down." His arms tightened. "I wanted to tell you tonight. Todd accepted a bribe to fake the inspection failure and sell Heidi to a game preserve. They found his emails, and apparently the trail wasn't hard to follow, although he might have gotten away with it if it hadn't been for us." He meant them being together, she supposed, since Todd wouldn't have had to fake the failure if McCoy hadn't helped her build that fence. "He's being apprehended and I have the promotion." His breath huffed out. "Which doesn't seem like such a good thing if you're not going to be here." His hands pressed down her back and pulled her closer. Jillian, I'd give it all up and go with you. I don't care about the job, and I'd leave my country. Maybe that's crazy, but I wouldn't even have to think twice." "But—" His shoulders slumped and he set his forehead down on top of her head. "How can I leave Uncle Roy?" She could not get upset at something that made complete sense. "If I can't leave Heidi, I certainly can't expect you to leave Uncle Roy. It wouldn't be right." "I assumed that's what the phone call was about?" he asked in the quiet stillness. "Yes, tomorrow, sometime before dark is what he said." "I see." His voice was low and careful. "Then tonight could be the last time I ever see you." Her breath came out on a shaky sigh. "I still owe money for the last time I came over. I'd better pay that before I even think about—" "No, it's too dangerous. You shouldn't have done it the first time. I definitely don't want you using the drug cartel to come back." She leaned back a little. "I'm coming back to you. I'm not asking you to wait, and I'm not even saying I want you to. I just want you to know that when I've taken care of Hazel and Heidi and paid my debt, I'll be coming back to you." "I can't get money until Monday. Give me the information. I'll pay it." Her heart froze. "I'm not putting a gringo in touch with the Mexican drug cartel. We'd both get killed." "Then I'll wire you the money." "No, it's my problem. I need to take care of it." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "I'm all about taking responsibility for your problems, but not in this case. I want to be with you now, not sometime in the future. You can owe me if that's how you want to play it, although it's not what I want." She put her hand on his cheek and pressed closer to him. "Let's not spend our last night together arguing." They kissed in the kitchen for a long time. They didn't need words to communicate that neither of them wanted to part. Eventually, they made their way out to the porch and sat on the front porch swing until the sun came up. Jillian snuggled close with McCoy's strong arms around her. She didn't know what he was thinking about, but she spent the night enjoying his closeness and trying to figure out some way for them to be together. Surely there was a way. But if there was, she couldn't think of it. Not one that kept the elephant safe, kept Uncle Roy in the home he loved, and allowed McCoy to keep his integrity. She needed to be legal in order for that to happen. Still, despite the unresolved issues in her head, she enjoyed these last few hours. They could sleep tomorrow. Finally, the sky started flaming orange and pink, and it was time for Jillian to go take care of her animals. "I can take care of your kennel dogs until the last one is picked up," McCoy said as they cleaned out the kennels, his voice and posture as depressed as she'd ever seen it. She showed him the information in her small office. She didn't have a computer system, just a notepad with people's and dogs' names on it. She had been charging, both for her classes and for kenneling, on a weekly basis, so there wasn't much to canceling her classes. McCoy had on his serious face, and she knew the dogs would all be in good hands. His integrity wouldn't allow him to do any different. They took care of Heidi together. He stood in the back while she taught 3 obedience classes before lunch. Every time she looked at him, his hot gaze was following her every move. The emptiness in her chest grew and expanded until she felt like it would swallow her whole. It was torture to try to concentrate on teaching when her heart hurt like it had already been ripped from her chest. McCoy figured whoever was coming would be late picking up the elephant, but he was wrong. A tractor trailer showed up shortly after 3. He and Jillian sat on her stoop, her slender body tucked between his legs. He had his arms wrapped around her and couldn't keep from wondering why it had taken his whole life to find his perfect match, only to have her taken from him as soon as he had her. It didn't seem fair. But life wasn't fair. They watched as the big tractor trailer crept down the driveway. He couldn't stop his hands from fisting, but he did keep from holding on to Jillian. She'd made the decision to leave, to do what was best for the animals she loved. At the same time, he had to do right by the man who'd raised him. So she had to leave, and he wasn't going to stop her, no matter how badly he might want to. A sedan followed the truck down the lane, heading toward Jillian's house, while the truck backed into the barn. Jillian had said that Fink and Ellie and their children were heading to a conference today, so McCoy didn't worry about any kids getting run over. Snickers was on the porch with them. Jillian had said that Fink and Ellie were taking her as well. He ran that all over in his mind as the car, a Lexus, came to a stop in front of the porch. A Latino man, with a big white smile, wearing a black business suit, stepped confidently out of the driver's door. Barely glancing at McCoy, the man had eyes only for Jillian. "I would recognize you anywhere, my beautiful darling. Jillian Powell, the most stunning performer to ever work under the big top." He walked to the step, holding out his hand and taking Jillian's in his, despite McCoy's arms still being around her. She stiffened, but allowed it. McCoy ground his teeth together. This man was not going to make her leaving less painful. McCoy couldn't help noticing that next to the flashy car and fashionable suit, his old truck and jeans and a t-shirt looked ragged and, dare he think it, boring. He'd already told himself that Jillian wasn't like his mother or his sisters or his fiancée, and he truly believed it, but the thought kept punching into his consciousness like hammer blows. She wasn't leaving because he bored her. She was doing it because of her animals. But next to this charismatic man, McCoy felt boring. Jillian would have a more exciting life with him, no doubt. Jillian stood and McCoy stood with her. "We need to move quickly," the man said. "I'm Mario." He held out a hand to McCoy. McCoy shook it and gave his own name. One word. Mario's handshake was firm, his eye contact direct. McCoy couldn't find anything not to like, except the familiar and possessive way he acted toward Jillian. The hand on her shoulder, the lingering gaze on her face, the way his body invaded her space and ignored McCoy's presence. But McCoy wouldn't let himself fight over her. She could make the decision. It wouldn't be right for him to try to force her to choose him for the next 30 minutes when she was leaving anyway. So he backed off, walking beside her, not holding her hand or keeping his arm around her as he wanted. He opened the gate as she brought Heidi out and carried several bales of hay up the ramp of the trailer as Jillian waited and Mario talked about how Hazel was doing. Jillian's eyes, normally full of fire and snap, were dull, and McCoy took cold comfort in that, at least. Heidi walked right up onto the trailer. They made sure she was settled and closed the door behind her. The driver pulled out while McCoy followed Mario and Jillian up the drive. When Mario put his arm around Jillian's shoulders, McCoy's backbone heated like red-hot metal, and his chest felt like the inside of a hot air balloon. But he kept his hands at his side and stoically made each foot fall in front of the other, determined to see it through to the end. Jillian moved away, and Mario's hand dropped. That helped ease the pressure in McCoy's chest, but he could hardly wait to be finished here, so he could go into the woods somewhere and ease the scalding rawness that scraped every nerve in his body. It had been years since he'd felt like crying, maybe since his parents split. Was he doing the wrong thing by staying with Uncle Roy? It seemed like a very responsible, boring thing to do. Why couldn't he ditch any responsibility to him and follow Jillian? But there was nothing in his character that would allow him to shove his uncle in a nursing home so he could be free to do what he wanted. "I have a suitcase," Jillian said as they reached the porch. "McCoy will help me get it." Mario took the hint and stayed by his car. Jillian took McCoy's hand and pulled him up the step and into her house. He'd not been in since the day she'd burnt supper. It felt like a long time ago. But he didn't have time to look around, because as soon as the door was shut behind them, Jillian turned, grabbing his head in both hands and kissing him with a desperation that pulled every last bit of strength from his body. Everything felt weak, his knees, his legs, his lungs. But he clung to her and kissed her back, knowing it could be the last time. He kissed her straight from his soul. Her suitcase was by the door, and when she ripped her mouth from his, with no words between them, he picked it up, clenching his jaw, and followed her out. Chapter 20. 6 weeks later. Jillian forked hay into the pen for Hazel and Heidi. "I always make sure there's no waste in the area where they eat," she explained to Kira, the girl David had hired to be Jillian's replacement. Kira nodded solemnly. She'd been a fast learner, and in the week that she'd been in Brazil, she'd pretty much learned everything Jillian could teach. Kira had worked with elephants before, which is how David had found her, working in a Mexico City zoo. Jillian was confident that Kira loved Hazel and Heidi and would be a good companion. David had found the money. The men Ricardo sent with Heidi had never taken it with them and wired it to her. Jillian had been able to pay off all her debts, and she no longer owed the drug cartel. She had enough money to pay to try to get back into America, but McCoy had specifically told her he didn't want her taking that chance. She was torn. On one hand, she wanted to be back with him, but on the other, she knew he was right. It was a dangerous game, and security at the border had only increased, which did not put the cartel workers in a good mood, to say the least. Kira took the shovel and started cleaning out the manure in the large, lavish enclosure. Jillian leaned against the fence. Tonight, Mario was driving her to the airport. His plane took off early tomorrow morning. She'd be in Mexico this time tomorrow. She could apply for a work visa or even immigration status, but her chances of being accepted without any kind of skill or job or secondary education was low. But that's what McCoy would want. He'd never said he would wait for her. She hadn't asked him to. But just knowing what kind of man he was, she'd bet everything she had that he'd love her until he died. It was just the way he was. Part of the reason she loved him. Therefore, she could afford to take her time and do it right. Not that she wanted to. Sometimes she could hardly control the irritation in her chest that made her want to start north, walking if she had to get to McCoy. But it wasn't the best way, and she was determined to try to do it right. This time. Kira got done cleaning the pen, putting the shovel away and taking the wheelbarrow over to the waste pile. Kira also had experience with horses and ostriches, both of which Mario had. As Jillian watched, Mario met Kira by the horse pens. They must have planned to go riding together, because Mario was dressed in his riding clothes, shiny boots and carrying a crop. It hadn't taken him long to get the hint that she didn't want him touching her, even though their culture was much more touchy-feely than American culture. The only hands that felt right to her were McCoy's. The weight of a hand fell on her shoulder. Perfect, like she'd imagined it. Only, she put her fingers up, touching rough flesh. Her heart stuttered as her eyes popped open. She spun, coming face to face with deep blue eyes. His blonde hair was a little longer, but his shoulders were just as broad and his face just as handsome. She didn't wait to talk, but threw herself into his arms, reaching up to kiss him before he could even say hello. His arm slid around her, but he didn't allow the kiss to last long. His lips were turned up. "No, I can't think when you kiss me."
"We don't need to think. Just feel happy."
"I need my brain." His words were choppy, like her kiss had already affected him. "I need to figure out how to convince you to marry me." She blinked, then smiled.
"Yes."
However he'd gotten here, whatever he'd had to do, she wasn't going to make the same mistake as the last time, thinking that his proposal wasn't romantic enough or whatever her problem had been. If he was mentioning marriage, she was saying yes. He laughed. "I thought it might be harder than that."
"Is that what took you so long?"
"No, I booked my plane ticket yesterday, the second I got my passport." He looked out over the enclosure. "It looks like Hazel and Heidi are doing well."
"Oh, yeah."
They were. She'd forgotten he didn't even have a passport.
Marriage? How? What?
She had so many questions, and they all jumbled in her head. He hadn't stopped smiling, and other than to look at the elephants, he hadn't taken his eyes off her. His hand ran down her hair. I talked to a lawyer. He said our best bet was for me to marry you in Mexico, then apply at the U.S. consulate for residency for you.
How long?
What about his job, Uncle Roy? I don't know. He couldn't say. They might not give it. His broad shoulders moved up. Gator's mother said you'd helped Avery take care of her when she had cancer, so she was moving in with Uncle Roy to be with him, however long it takes us to get you back in the U.S. legally, so you can stay forever. His eyes drilled down into hers. There was nothing she wanted more than to be with him forever. If they won't let you in, I'll apply to live in Mexico, or somewhere. We'll find somewhere to be together.
Really?
I don't care where. I truly don't. The only thing I care about is being with you. Her eyes widened at his words. Her hands gripped him tighter.
I love you.
I haven't heard that nearly enough. His grip loosened, and he bent a knee on the dry ground, pulling a small box out of his pocket. Jillian, I love you, more than anything. Marry me, please? He opened the box. A small ruby, surrounded by diamonds, winked up at her. The ring was breathtaking, but she didn't care.
Yes.
1,000 times yes. He slipped it on her finger and stood.
What about your job?
She asked, searching his face, hoping he wouldn't regret all the sacrifices he'd made. I told him I was taking some personal time. It's possible Louis will stay for a while and see if I come back. Maybe the supervisor position will still be there. He kissed her hand, then cupped her face. I don't care. I'm proud to be an American. I enjoy my job. But I love you. When I think that way, decisions are easy. He grinned, wolfishly. Now, do you suppose I can talk my fiancé into kissing her world traveler? It was a long kiss. Epilogue. Zane, Abe, Beck, and Cash. Fink and Ellie's kitchen, 3 months later, 9 o'clock at night. Zane Wilder sat in Fink and Ellie Finkenbinder's kitchen, a thick portfolio of plans, estimates, and diagrams lying on the table in front of him. Normally, this was not his area. His brother, Abe, was the architect, and the one that normally closed on all the big deals. Unfortunately, he, along with Beck and Cash, were still in California finishing up their last project. Zane owned an excavation company, and he'd been done with that job for over a week. He was much more comfortable sitting in the cab of his 20-ton dozer, nicknamed Fat Alice, than he was sitting here at the table, hoping to ink a multi-million-dollar deal for his brothers and himself. Of course, the fact that he was back in Gail's hometown might have a little something to do with the uncomfortable itchiness in his chest. Thanks for meeting us so late, Fink said as he set a cup of coffee down in front of Ellie before taking his own seat and putting his coffee on the table. No problem. For a job this big, we can make some concessions. Happy to hear that his voice didn't shake, Zane returned Gator's smile across the table. He'd gone to elementary school with Gator before his family imploded and the Mahoneys took him in. Abe, Beck, and Cash treated him just like a fourth brother, even if their parents had never officially adopted him. Gator leaned back and put a big arm around his wife, Avery. Her pink nails and quirky outfit contrasted with Gator's dark, brooding largeness, but it was obvious from the way they looked at each other that they were wildly in love. "It's better this way," Gator said. "If we do it before the kids go to bed, it's hard to concentrate."
And we'd have to say everything twice,
Ellie added. She exchanged a knowing smile with her daughter, Harper, who sat with her husband, Wyatt, on the other side of the table. They'd come up from Chile, where they were running a resort similar to the one that was in the plans on the table in front of Zane. It was Zane's understanding that Wyatt had something to do with the financing, and that he and his wife were going to be operating the resort in Pennsylvania once it was completed.
Well, the main reason we waited was because we thought Jillian and McCoy would be getting in tonight.
Harper snuggled more firmly into Wyatt's side, her hand on her protruding stomach, his arm holding her close. "I knew McCoy in school," Zane said. "He and Jillian were married in Mexico a few months ago. Jillian's been waiting for the U.S. Embassy to approve her visa, which they've done, and they were heading home early this morning." Fink took a small sip of his coffee.
Jillian texted me an hour ago and said they were on their way,
Avery said, her bracelet sparkling in the overhead kitchen light. "How much time do you have, Zane?" Fink asked. "Jillian has worked to keep things on the farm going, plus she's part of the family. I'd like to involve her, and now McCoy, if we can. Can we wait a few more minutes?" Zane shrugged, resisting the urge to tug at the collar of the unfamiliar polo shirt he wore. He was used to worn t-shirts. "I have all night." His brothers were depending on him to land the deal for all of them. Not just Abe, who already had the architectural contract, but Cash expected to use his construction company to build the buildings, and Beck wanted the contract for the electrical systems, along with all the HVAC work. They had everything wrapped up in one bid, as they did with every project they worked on together, now sitting on the table in front of Zane. Fink and Ellie had given their verbal agreement, after looking at other bids and giving the Mahoney brothers precedent over the rest because of them being a local family, although their bundled bid was the lowest, too. Still, Zane felt the pressure of needing to perform and not let his adopted brothers down. He owed the Mahoney family a debt he could never pay. He'd not been perfect over the years, Gail being a case in point, but the Mahoneys didn't know about her. "If we'd have done this in the morning," Fink started, but he was interrupted by the door opening. A dark-haired beauty, slender and graceful, walked in. A tall, broad-shouldered blonde dude followed her. The couples at the table turned, and everything went quiet before pandemonium broke out. Zane was the only one left at the table as McCoy and, Zane assumed it was Jillian with him, were surrounded, hugged, and grilled on their stay in Mexico, their trip home, their marriage, and Jillian's visa. It was a good 20 minutes before they dragged McCoy and Jillian to the table and sat them down beside Zane. At that point, Zane had heard so much about them, he knew their history almost as well as he knew his own. And he was happy for them, really. They looked totally in love as they smiled into each other's eyes. Obviously, with Jillian's accent, their backgrounds were different, but the way they cuddled and laughed together, the way they seemed to know what the other was thinking, the way they touched, both with their hands and their gazes, it was obvious they were meant for each other. Zane could have had that with Gail, but he'd messed everything up until the only thing left for him to do was leave. Through the years that had gone by, he'd become successful. Maybe not in the way her dad considered success, with a college degree and a white collar to wear to work every day, but financially successful. He might not be a pillar of society, but protective mamas didn't shove their young daughters behind their backs when he strolled into town. Not anymore. Maybe it was just first love, or maybe it was truly that Gail was his soulmate. Whatever, he couldn't get interested in the women who wanted him now. As much as he wanted to be the other half of a happy couple like the ones around the table, there was only one girl who ever felt like she was the one who would make him whole. And he'd burned that bridge. If he got this job, he'd be working for several months in love. Maybe he'd see Gail. Not that there could ever be anything between them after what he did, but just so maybe he could see that she wasn't the angel that his dreams made her out to be. No woman could be that perfect. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great Jessie Gussman audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.